Thank you so much. It's always so wonderful to see people turn up for this, even standing. I just want to say that you don't have to come here. This film is free on YouTube. It's like available for everyone. But it's always so wonderful to see this in a group setting. I've been to so many festivals with Moshari, but it's amazing to see this in Bangladesh with such a wonderful crowd, especially at LitFest. I think this short was made for the theatrical experience to be watched together, to enjoy it, scream, whatever, experience it together. So this is fantastic. Thank you so much for coming. I just want to thank the amazing people who've worked on this film, other than me, our co-producer Bushra. If you like the cinematography, the visuals of the film, Ejaz Mehdi, he's wonderful. Tamir, who did the music for the film, he has a session at LitFest as well. Incredible musician. Singh Yemen, the only member of our team who's not from Bangladesh. He's a Singaporean sound designer. All the sound effects, the sound design of the film, credit goes to him. And of course, our lovely cast, Sunera, Honora, the little girl who's actually my niece, and Moyed, who played the monster in the movie. So yeah, I just huge round of applause for them, the incredible team.
Thank you so much, Nuhash, for joining us. So I'll cut to the chase. So far, Moshari has screened in Asia, North America, Australia, as well as Antarctica, which until today I didn't even know had enough of a human population, let alone film festivals. Moshari has also won multiple accolades at international film festivals, including 3 Oscar qualifying awards. But perhaps the most enormous success of Moshari has been you signing with Anonymous Content and CAA, which for the record is one of the world's leading talent agencies, which represents everyone from Steven Spielberg to Zendaya. To add to that, Oscar winners Jordan Peele and Riz Ahmed have also joined Moshari as executive producers recently. So what has the journey been like, looking back to day one of conceiving the idea of Moshari?
Yeah, that's a good question. So first of all, I just want to say that, you know, like there's been a lot of press about the awards and the Oscar qualifying festivals and all that stuff for Moshari, but that's really not the reason why we make movies. It just kind of sort of happened. In fact, when I came up with the idea for Moshari, I was 13 years old. I was very young when I came up with this idea. And really, I was just thinking, you know, I grew up on these kind of big Hollywood movies, and, you know, it's always like the Avengers saving New York and aliens attacking New York or London. And these big events are always happening in other parts of the world, the major cities. And I thought, what's happening in Bangladesh? What would happen if it's the end of the world, but the focus of the film is on Bangladesh and its small community of survivors, maybe just 2 sisters. So that was one initial seed of the idea. And I don't know, I just like, as a child, I was always afraid of the Moshari. As a kid, I don't know if anyone else has had this feeling. When I was a kid, I'd sleep under the Moshari, and I don't know, like the moonlight would trap inside the Moshari in a weird way where it would kind of glow, the net would kind of glow, and you can't see what's outside. So I would imagine, what if there's like a monster or something on the other side? And you know, when the wind blows, it's like you feel like, well, what if it was a creature? What if it was like a finger on the other side of the Moshari? So my imagination would run wild as a child, and I just wanted to translate those childhood fears, very specific, very culturally specific childhood fears, into something hopefully universal. And you know, just the idea of the Moshari, because weirdly, the Moshari made me feel safe and protected. At the same time, I felt suffocated, like just like the little girl in the film says, what if I don't sleep under the Moshari tonight? I feel that every night, you know, I feel like, do I really need this? It's suffocating. And I think that dual role that the Moshari plays, where it both protects you and it suffocates you, that's our relationship with family sometimes. You know, our family, they both protect us, but sometimes in trying to protect us, they suffocate us. They make us feel like, okay, this is a little too much. And that's the relationship between the 2 sisters. A lot of that is taken from my own personal life, and again, from my childhood trauma and experiences and that feeling of protection. So yeah, I just really wanted to put all that together in a movie. And you know, I really didn't expect it to sort of win awards তো এটা অনেক দূরের কথা. I wasn't even thinking awards. I wasn't even thinking film festivals because when I finished the film, and we got some local support, we got some sort of personal investments, and I had some savings from advertisements and soap commercials and bathroom cleaning commercials that I directed, saving up money for all that. So when we finished it, we showed it to all these really great producers in Bangladesh. And so the headline version, the clickbait version, is every producer in Bangladesh said no to me when I showed them Moshari, but it's a little bit of a stretch. What really happened was I showed it to all these great producers, and they just said, we don't know what to do with this movie. It's a horror film from Bangladesh. We don't think this would go to film festivals. We don't know if there's an audience for this around the world, let alone in Bangladesh. We don't know if anyone's going to get it. But there was this one producer, Abu Shahid Iman. He produced my last film. It was called Iti Tomari Dhaka, Sincerely Yours Dhaka. I don't know if anyone's seen that. It's on Netflix. I have a segment there called The Background Artist. So Iman Bhai, he came up to me and he said, look, Nuhash, you're really weird and the ideas in your head are really weird. You have a very specific way of seeing the world. And I don't know, you owe it to yourself to see if the world is interested in your vision. So it doesn't matter if this does well. I think you should send it to police. I think just send it to some festivals, send it to the world and see what the response is, because you owe it to yourself to see if anyone cares. And I'm so glad I did, because the response has been, incredible so far.
Thank you. So going back to the film festival run of Moshari, how can you demystify the international film festival process for aspiring filmmakers or enthusiasts for that matter? How does that all happen?
Yeah, I'm curious. Are there filmmakers or film enthusiasts in the audience? Could I have a raise of hands to see if anyone is interested? Okay, yeah, that's cool. Some nice show of hands. So yeah, I always thought that sending a film to film festivals is a very difficult process, and you need to know someone at a film festival. And I'm really glad every local producer said no to me, because that allowed me to sort of figure it out for myself. And it's really simple. I think it's about watching films that have screened at these festivals before, seeing what the tastes are of these programmers, because look, festivals, they're run by people and everyone has different tastes. Every festival has a different kind of vibe, kind of air to it. So I felt like South by Southwest could be a festival where Moshari could play. So I applied to certain festivals, and I don't know, something really strange happened. The day we screened at South by Southwest, which was in Austin, Texas, within 1 week from that, I got an email from someone at Lucasfilm. That's the people who make Star Wars. They reached out and they said, hey, somehow we watched your movie and we liked it. And then within another week, this Marvel superhero movie director saw Moshari on a plane, like on the way to editing one of his Marvel movies, and he liked the film so much.
Would you like to mention who the director is?
I shouldn't. But yeah, he recommended the film to his agent, and his agent to CAA, and he recommended a certain agent who's now signed me. So that's how all that happened. And I don't know, I think what really connected was, I've been to a lot of festivals before. I went to Busan, I've been all over. And whenever I say I have a Bangladeshi film, people don't really know how to react, because people don't really know what Bangladeshi cinema looks like, let alone, knowing what Bangladesh even is sometimes. Some people are like, oh, is it a part of India? What is it? So there's a real sense of confusion. But last year, 2022, it feels so weird to say last year. So when I said I have a Bangladeshi horror film, people just kind of turned their heads and were like, oh, that's interesting. I've never seen a Bangladeshi horror film. I've never heard of one. So there was a lot of interest, because I think that idea of taking Bangladeshi culture and combining it with horror, it hasn't really been done before in the film festival circuit. So I think that a lot of attention came just from that.
I hope that answer helps all the aspiring filmmakers here to follow in Nuhash's footsteps and have many more Oscar-qualifying movies and possibly Oscar-winning movies in the future of Bangladesh film industry.
Yeah, no, I just qualified. It's up to you, the next ones, to win the Oscar. That's what I want to see.
So Variety's breaking news about Jordan Peele and Riz Ahmed coming on board Moshari as EPs calls Moshari a climate change film. The Daily Star's review interprets the film as a story debating the horrors that South Asian women face. Whereas Film Threat recognizes Moshari as a film about post-colonial trauma. Whether it's film or literature, the interpretation often differs from the author's intent. What's your interpretation of Moshari?
Yeah, see, that's always a difficult question to ask me what the film means and what my interpretation of it is. And it's been so interesting to go around the world. Like I was in South Korea at the Busan Festival, and an audience member from the screening, a Korean filmmaker, he asked me if the monster in the movie represents the West, if that represents sort of America and Europe and all that, the West, and the sisters represent the third world, if that's what the film is about. And I found that question so interesting. My answer for that was that, okay, even why do we even call it the third world? We didn't ask for that name. Even that name was given to us. So even in the phrasing of that question shows our biases. But at the same time, there's so many Bangladeshi, just like the Daily Star, so many Bangladeshi reviewers who thought that the film is about the horrors that women face here. And when I go to America, people, their interpretation is completely different. They're like, oh, it's all about the monster. They want to turn it into a franchise. And I realized that, that's, I think, the wonderful thing about horror is you project your own fears onto the film. Like whatever you as a society are afraid of, or you think is the problem, you can insert into the film. But for me, honestly, I can be very intellectual and say that I meant for all those layers very, very intentionally, but that's just not true. I was 13 years old when I came up with this idea. For me, it was just like kind of cool, and I thought it would be a scary horror movie. And it was just really, I think sometimes storytelling is just about holding on to our inner child, if that makes sense. Like I try to think of the stories that I would have loved when I was a kid, that would have scared me or thrilled me, or I would have had fun with. And really, for me, it was about my personal trauma because, my parents, they separated when I was very young. And I had a great childhood. I had a wonderful sort of upbringing that I'm very lucky and very privileged to have. But, your parents separating as a kid, that really did affect me. And my sisters, I have 3 sisters, they kind of became my protectors. My sisters kind of became motherly figures in my life, almost more so than my actual parents. And I remember this very specifically, my younger sister, who's still older than me, she's like 9 years older than me. After my parents separated, it was kind of all over the news in Bangladesh. Everyone was talking about it. And it was, as a child, it was very difficult for me to take in because it was like, it was a very personal tragedy, but it felt like everyone knows about it and it was a whole thing. So my sister and I, we went to America. We went on a trip to America to visit my other sister who was living in Atlanta at the time. So I remember this very clearly. My sister and I, we were in Atlanta. We went to a Dunkin' Donuts, which I think they have in Bangladesh. Do they have a Dunkin' Donuts? They don't? Okay. But we went to a Dunkin' Donuts in America. And we're like, oh, the Dunkin' Donuts is a big franchise. So we went to this donut shop and we were sitting outside. And there was one of the staff there was Bangladeshi. So there's this Bangladeshi guy who came up to us and he was very excited. He didn't know who I was. He didn't know who my sister was, but he was just Bangladeshi and he was excited to see 2 other Bangladeshis. So he gave us free donuts. He came up to me with the free donuts and he was like, oh my God, you're from Bangladesh? Did you hear about blank and blank getting divorced? And he just started going on a rant about my family and all the rumors he heard and what is true and what's not true and what's made up and just like all this nasty stuff about my family. But he didn't know it's my family. And I'm just there cringing really hard. And yeah, it was terrible. And I felt like I have no control over the world around me. But all I had was my family. All I had was my sister. So that's really how it felt. It felt like it was the end of the world, honestly. And it felt like it was the end of the world and my sister is all I have. And really, I think subconsciously that's the emotion, that is the trauma that I wanted to portray in Moshari, in the short film. But, you know, I also like the idea of, I would say, layers of trauma, because there's your family trauma, there is the colonial trauma, and on the outside, there's climate trauma. You know, there's the world surrounding us and how we've destroyed our own environment. So I would say that, you know, it's kind of like a Russian nesting doll of trauma, if that's the way you want to view it as well.
I'm terribly sorry you had to go through those experiences, but also really grateful that you took it and turned it into art.
Thank you.
So Pet Kata Shah is an anthology about ancient Bangla superstition and folklore. Foreigners Only is an absurdist psychological horror about the colonial hangover and our obsession with fair skin. Then there's Moshari. What's with your obsession with Bangla horror?
So yeah, there's an intellectual answer to that, but like the honest answer is, look, making horror is fun, and I think it's no one has been doing it for a while, and I want to do something different. There have been a lot of thrillers, a lot of Bangla thrillers, but I felt like, I don't know, like as a child, the stories we always heard were horror stories, right? Like I remember the stories I read in school. There was a lot of poetry, a lot of literature, and you know, when you're young, you're told that this is good Bangla literature. You have to read this. This is what you're taught in school. But then when you go home, it's you and your cousins under a moshari at a sleepover or with your grandmother, and you're listening to horror stories, Bhuter Golpo, Bhuter Golpo shuni. And that I think is so integral to our culture. And not just as kids. Like a couple of years ago, I was working for this INGO called WaterAid, and we went on this annual retreat. And I didn't really know anyone there. It was kind of this scenario where a lot of people way older than me, very corporate types. And I'm like, okay, I'm not really sure if I get along with everyone. But then suddenly it was like 11 p.m. at this retreat, and everyone just started telling ghost stories. And the beautiful thing about it was the perfect icebreaker, because everyone just kind of, whenever a Bengali starts a ghost story, first they tell you where their deshebari is. They tell you, oh, my village is in Mamunshing, and there's this little thing here, there's a little graveyard here, and this happens. So by telling horror stories, everyone was kind of talking about their lives, their culture, their childhood. And I just think it's so beautiful that horror is actually, it's in our blood. You know, it's not something we borrowed from the West, borrowed from Korean cinema or whatever, Conjuring or other horror movies. It's in our blood. And it's so weird that it's been in Bangla literature for so long, and in Bangla folk tales and superstition. But where is like the horror cinema? I felt like there was an absence there. And it was kind of almost a strategic move. Like if I can fill that gap and do a decent job at it, maybe there's something there. And I just think that, you know, the beautiful thing about tapping into Bangla horror is we have so much trauma as a people, as Bengalis. You know, if you think about sort of, you know, the partition, if you think about all the wars, if you think about everything we go through on a day-to-day basis. So where I live in Bonani, there's this like manhole right in front of my house, and it's not covered. There's just like a small leaf on top of the manhole, but it's not covered. So I think I almost fell into that manhole a couple of times. So it's a way to keep myself grounded and humble. Like, it doesn't matter how many awards I win or how successful I am. I could walk out of my house any day and fall into that manhole and die. So nothing matters. And I just, it helps me think that horror is such a big part of our everyday lives as Bengalis, no matter where we're living in the world. So if we don't have that horror in our cinema, then our movies just aren't authentic. Then it's not representing our real life. So yeah, it was really important for me to kind of tap into that, if that makes sense.
So let's rewind a little from your horror journey. Your romantic comedy Natok Satsho Taka garnered millions of views and established you as a comedy director. Your short film, The Background Artist, which opens Sincerely Yours Taka, is also a comedy drama. Your comedies have received commercial success as well as festival attention while you were in your 20s. They could have been a great safety net for you, your own moshari, so to speak. Why venture out from that safety net of comedy into horror?
I don't know. I think the easy answer is I kind of got bored and it felt a little too easy. I love comedy, and I think there's a lot of comedy in Moshari as well. I heard a lot of people laugh at certain moments throughout the film. I think there'll always be dark comedy in my films. You know, Jordan Peele has this quote that horror and comedy are the same thing, but the music is different. That's the only thing that's different in horror and comedy. It's essentially the same thing. You set something up, boom, there's a payoff, but it's the soundtrack that really makes the difference. But I also think that, you know, I love the fact that a lot of people don't consider horror as cinema. They don't think horror, they think of it as a low art, considered to high art, you know? And I kind of really like that aspect because when I started filmmaking, I don't know if any of the aspiring filmmakers here feel this way. When I started filmmaking, I felt like, oh my God, there's so much great cinema behind me in the past. So when I start to make a movie, I have to bow down at the altar of these great filmmakers and have to live up to their expectations in a way. But when you're making horror, everyone kind of tells you that, you know, it's not anything. And I kind of really like that about horror because when I was making stuff like Moshari or even Pet Kata Shah, I felt like, I don't know if anyone's gonna watch this. I don't know if this matters to anyone. And that gave me the freedom to really kind of do whatever I wanted. Like when I was holding the camera, I felt like, hey, you know, I don't have to follow the rule of thirds and this golden ratio of how a character is supposed to be framed beautifully. I can change the angle and I can distort the images. I can distort the music and I can tap into something that's more raw. So I think even in trying to make horror, I grew as an artist because I stopped, you know, caring about what other people were thinking. But weirdly, that's what the world responded to in a way.
It's great that the world did. I think we're going to open up the panel for some questions from the audience. If the stage management could just have a microphone out in the audience. Does anyone have a question? Yes, sir.
Can I ask the question in Bengali?
Yes, of course.
আমি জানতে চাচ্ছিলাম ডিটেকটিভ থ্রিলার ঘরানার সিনেমা বানানোর কোনো ইচ্ছা আপনার আছে কিনা, যেমন ব্যোমকেশ সিরিজ বা ফেলুদা সিরিজ, যেগুলো বিখ্যাত বই ছিল, চরিত্র ছিল, সেগুলোর উপরে আবার পরবর্তীতে সিনেমাও হয়েছে। এখন এই ধরনের ডিটেকটিভ থ্রিলার বানানোর কোনো আগ্রহ আপনার আছে না? এই বিষয়ে আপনার চিন্তা ভাবনা
হ্যাঁ, শিওর। আমার কাছে মনে হয় যে অনেক ডিটেকটিভ থ্রিলার অ্যাকচুয়ালি অলরেডি হচ্ছে, লাইক ফেলুদা সিরিজটা I think already হইচইতে adaptation হচ্ছে at the moment. And I feel like there are a lot of great thriller directors already doing a wonderful job. So I feel like I don't necessarily have to tap into that because অনেকে already ওটা করছে। আর আমার কাছে না মনে হয় যে থ্রিলার বানালে দুইটা জিনিস হয় মাঝে মাঝে। একটা হচ্ছে যে it becomes very old school, like ফেলুদা আমরা properly adapt করতে পারি না and it becomes very nostalgic. না হলে আমরা modernize করতে গিয়ে it kind of feels like a rip-off of Sacred Games or other Indian thrillers or American thrillers. I feel like the thriller genre isn't as sort of core to our blood as horror is. I feel like horror is kind of more Bengali in a weird way. That's why I think I kind of gravitate towards horror a little bit more. But if it's the right kind of psychological thriller, maybe. I would say that Pet Kata Shah, there's the second episode, Mishti Kichu. I would say it's a supernatural thriller. It's very psychological in how it deals with Jonchal Chaudhary and the character he plays and his kind of psychological downfall, but only with a supernatural lens.
Thank you. Do we have another question? Yes, right there.
Thank you. Right. At first, I would like to really appreciate your effort for giving us so many beautiful horrors. We didn't have horror in Bangla, and finally we can say that we have some great horror stories in Bangla. Last year, as it feels funny to say, last year, me and my sister, we watched Pet Kata Shah under the Moshari. Yeah, so we were watching it. She loves horror, but she doesn't like watching it because she gets scared, so I have to watch it with her. Anyways, so my favorite one was Mishti Kichu, as you just mentioned. My question is, how did you make that connection? Like, you know, a gene may come at the store at night. From there, you went to the fallen angel concept. That was mind-blowing. When the thing was revealed and the mother figure was telling that, if that is Iblis, I was like, whoa. How did you make that kind of connection? I mean, it was mind-blowing. That's my personal question. And of course, thank you so much for opening a new horizon for us aspiring writers. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for spoiling the story. If anyone, there's actually a screening of Pet Kata Shah, and when is it? It's at 4. It's not today. It's today. It's definitely today. But yeah, no, that's a really good question. Yeah, so I was actually thinking, the point of Pet Kara Shah was taking our very classic horror stories, or like the stuff we grew up on, like Mishti Dokane Jin Ashe. That's when I always heard je Mishti Dokane Rater Bela Jin Hara Chola Kore. So I kind of wanted to reinvent that and modernize that. And then I was suddenly thinking about Islam and our religion and how apparently in a lot of texts, Iblis, Satan, is a jinn. But then there are also some texts that say Satan was a Ferishta. So there's some debate among Islamic scholars about whether he's a jinn or a Ferishta. And I thought, what if we make that an actual plot point in the story, where in the beginning you just think he's a jinn, but then there's a reveal about what he actually is. But because I didn't want to sort of, I didn't want to get in trouble in terms of sort of the theology of it, the character of the jinn, he's never really, people think he's a jinn. When he meets John Jol's character for the first time, you'll notice he says, "Tumi jano to, ami ki?" But he doesn't himself say he's a jinn, and that was very intentional. He kind of lets the other people assume what he is, because the other thing that I've heard is apparently Satan doesn't lie. Apparently Iblis is very truthful. He never says a lie. So that was interesting. And the other interpretation was, a fallen angel. Our interpretation of that was an old man with a walking stick. So no matter what form he takes, he has the injury of falling from the heavens. And that's a pain that he carries on his foot. So he has to walk with a stick. And that's kind of a metaphor for his injured pride. So that was also an interesting interpretation. When I was talking to Afzal Hussain about the role, and he's such a fantastic actor, the brief was kind of like, what if Iblis Shaitan was walking around Mofasshols of Bangladesh? And just like, what would he look like as a Bangladeshi? And the interpretation was kind of like, আমাদের সবার কোনো একটা চাচা থাকে না, all those uncles we have যারা অনেক travel করে, they traveled around the world, and then every time they're talking to you, they're like, আমি কিন্তু একদিন মিশরে গিয়েছিলাম, and I saw this or I saw that. So the interpretation was he's this very well-traveled man who's always talking about his journeys, এই দেশে, ওই দেশে, because he's lived almost forever. So that was kind of how we took this very, idealistic kind of character of Iblis and kind of brought it down to on a very kind of ground level. So that was really, really fun to kind of brainstorm and develop. I don't know if that answers your question.
Let's get a question from the middle. Can we get the microphone to him, please?
Hello. My question is, your whole life you lived under the light of the media. And even when your first short film, if I'm not wrong, Satsho Takar Dam, released, it was hype. Like, if anyone else made a short film like that, that film wouldn't have been that hype. How much did the hype affect you?
I think it was actually Satsho Takar Dam. It was Hotel Albatross. That was the first thing that I made in 2017. And it was very scary because my entire life, I've never felt any hype. I went to this school called Sunbeams, where, everyone had kind of very intellectual parents, or they did something or the other. I never felt like I was special growing up. I felt like a very normal, weird little kid. So I was very kind of in that own bubble. But then when I made Hotel Albatross, the day before it came out, I saw all these headlines like, oh, Ruhash Humayun is making his first thing. Will it live up to the hype? And I felt like that hype was a media creation, and that kind of generated from that. But it was really scary, and I'm also obviously very lucky because I got to learn my craft by actually doing the work. But I think I see the kind of negative, the horrors of that limelight a lot more. So people think that it's a really fun thing, but I can tell you about if when someone in the limelight, if you lose your parent, when you're trying to grieve your parent, there is a guy on a tree trying to take a picture of his dead body. And that is such a weird feeling to have. I was 19 years old. I'm like, trying to pray for my father, and there's a guy hanging on a tree, flashing a picture of his dead body, and that picture's still on Google Images. If you do a deep enough search, you'll find it. So yeah, I think it's kind of really weird and scary. But I think what it also really did to me was it made me want to push beyond sort of this local industry a lot. And that's when, Aparajit asked me why I moved away from comedy and why I moved away from that kind of work, because it was too easy for me. If I make like some whatever YouTube funny natok content, it's going to get millions of views because people know my family, people are aware of who I am. So it's a lot more fun to be at an international film festival where nobody knows who I am, but they're appreciating me for my work, and they're citing me for my work, and they're giving me the first US streaming platform deal or whatever because of my work. So that's why I kind of like that space. And that makes me really happy, because if I was anyone else, I might have been sucked in by the mediocrity and by that sort of kind of thing of the local industry. I remember when Amitabh Reza, great filmmaker, director of Aina Baji, he produced Hotel Albatross actually. And I remember that before it came out, he gave me this wonderful advice. He said, Nuhash, অনেকে এটা দেখে বলবে যে খুবই ফালতু হয়েছে, তুমি ওদের কথা শুনবা না। অনেকে আবার দেখে বলবে যে খুবই ভালো হয়েছে, ওদের কথা শুনবা না। So till this day, I live by that advice when it comes to this industry, where you shouldn't really let it get to your head. I don't know if that answers your question a little bit.
We have time for 2 very quick questions. Let's go to her in the middle.
Hi, I just wanted to say again, congratulations on your wonderful films and work. I actually came here with my sister, my younger sister today, and after we watched it, we were like discussing the end when the older sister, like she gets slipped out of the mortuary, and we were both trying to like discuss on how that happened. Like, did she step out by accident, on purpose? Did the younger sister pull it off her? Like, there's different interpretations, and we definitely like had a lot of empathy with the characters, and we saw ourselves there. We kind of wanted to ask your interpretation of that.
Sure. Which moment are you talking about? When the mortuary gets pulled off?
Like at the very end, yeah. Like when the younger sister is in the wardrobe and the older one's outside.
Right. First of all, thank you for asking a question about the actual movie. So in that moment, sorry if that's poorly shot. We filmed that, I think, like in one night, that entire the action sequence in the end. So the way that I like to think is the big sister, she's still wearing the mortuary, and they're kind of having this moment where the younger sister is trapped inside. The big sister is trying to say, stay inside for a little longer. She wants to keep the younger sister safe. And again, it becomes that metaphor for protection, right? The big sister trying to protect the younger sister, but the younger sister feels suffocated. And the younger sister keeps saying, I wish mom was here because mom would play with my hair before I sleep. So it's like, I think the big sister, in trying to protect the younger sister, forgot how to love. Because love is a big part of protection. But when you've been through trauma, you kind of forget that. You feel like, oh no, I have to just take care of you. I'm not going to be loving to you. I'm just going to take care of you. And because I've done my responsibility of taking care of you, you should be grateful to me. I've done my part. So it's kind of showing that almost that toxicity that comes from that loving family relationship, but still somehow that love isn't showing. And I think the moment, I think the big sister says, all right, you know what, I'll move away to make you feel a little more like sort of like so you can breathe. So she moves away, and there's one shot where you see the mortuary gets tied
Gets stuck on the wardrobe.
Yeah, it's stuck on the wall. And that's what tears it, and that's what sort of makes it fall.
Accidental.
Yeah, it's accidental, but it's kind of, if you think about it, it's tied to the big sister trying to move away and trying to give the younger sister space. So it's kind of an incidental sacrifice almost. And sometimes we all have people in our lives who've made sacrifices for us. We don't appreciate them a lot of times. Maybe we appreciate them after they die, after they're gone, ironically. but a lot of parental figures in our life. Doesn't have to be our parents, could be our big sisters, could be a friend, a neighbor. They've done that for us. They've protected us, and they've killed a part of themselves in trying to do so.
Thank you so much. We're going to very quickly take one last question right there.
আমি প্রশ্নটা বাংলায় করতে চাচ্ছি।
অবশ্যই।
আমার জানার ছিল যে মানে মশারি চলচ্চিত্র নিয়ে তো বলাই হলো যে অনেকটা তার মানে ছোটবেলার কল্পনার জায়গা থেকে জায়গাটা চলে আসছে যে একটু ভীতি থাকে শিশুদের। কোথাও একটা আমার মনে হলো যে কোভিড এর সিচুয়েশনের সাথে কি কোথাও মেটাফরিক বা রূপক ভাবে দেখানো হয়েছে কিনা এখানে, বা দেখার সুযোগ থাকছে কিনা, যেহেতু আমরা একটা অজানা ভীতির সাথে বসবাস করছিলাম এবং আমরা কোথাও একটা মাস্ক নিয়ে ঘুরছিলাম, মশারি নিয়ে ঘুরছিলাম, ভাবছিলাম আমি হয়তো বা মুক্ত হয়ে যাব বা বাঁচবো, সেফ থাকবো, কিন্তু আমি আসলে জানি না কোথায় আমার মুক্তিটা। সেই বিষয়টা যখন বলছিল যে আমার দম বন্ধ হয়ে যাবে, বলা হচ্ছিল আর একটু পরেই ঘোর হবে, সেই ঘোরটা আমরা জানছিলাম না ঠিক কবে কখন। মানে আমার কোথাও একটা মনে হচ্ছিল অদ্ভুত সুন্দরভাবে একটা মেটাফোর বা রূপক আমরা দেখতে পারি এখানে কিনা।
Thank you so much. Very sundar at interpretation. In fact, round of applause for that. It's so beautiful. And honestly, like, আমরা যে সিনেমা বানাই, এটা জুড়ে সিনেমা বানাই, just for that one পুরো audience থেকে একজনের একটা সুন্দর interpretation শোনার জন্য. This is so wonderful to hear. I've heard a lot of interesting interpretations like that, যে এটা COVID নিয়ে, because in fact আমরা যখন মাস্কটা পরি, মাস্কটা আমাদেরকে সেফ রাখছে, at the same time মনে হচ্ছে দম বন্ধ লাগছে, we can't breathe. আবার আরেকজন বলেছিল যে I can't breathe, এটা কি জর্জ ফ্লয়েডের সাথে কানেক্টেড নাকি, because কোভিড এর সময় প্যান্ডেমিকের মধ্যে ওটা ছিল। Unfortunately, none of that was intended because আমরা এটা শুটিংটা করি কোভিড এর আগে। So it's a beautiful interpretation. It wasn't intended at all because actually আমরা পুরো শুটিংটাই করি কোভিড এর আগে। In fact, আমরা অরিজিনাল যে কাটটা ছিল মশারি, অরিজিনাল এডিটটাতে ফিল্মের প্রথমে প্যান্ডেমিক ওয়ার্ডটা ডেফিনিশন আসে যে প্যান্ডেমিক মানে কি and কি হয়েছে এই দুনিয়াতে। Then when COVID happened, we realized we don't need that anymore because everyone knows what a pandemic is. But I don't know. My friends tell me I'm kind of the weird prophecy moto je ei idea ta amader chilo before COVID. But you know, it's always interesting to see how something made a couple of different time would ever line up correct with the present day. And you know, that's kind of the, you know, sometimes I'm asked closing remarks jodi audience er jonno kichu bolar thake kono upodesh thake for young filmmakers. The advice I always give is like, we live in a world that is constantly moving. Like everyone is trying to make content, everyone is trying to be sort of viral, sort of we have to make something now, we have to post something now, and there's like an urgency, right? And I see this with filmmakers as well. They're always trying to follow trends, like oh ekhon hocche thriller trendy, amake ajke thriller banay felte hobe, ekhon eta trendy, or you know ekhon people just make memes, just oh acha ekta funny jinish viral holo, I have to make something right now so that it gets all that likes and views. The problem with filmmaking though is it takes time, right? It takes like, say, 1 month to 2 months to years to make a good film. Moshari took years to make. So যখন একটা জিনিস বানাতে বছরের পর বছর লাগতে পারে, then you can't follow trends anymore. Because আজকে একটা জিনিস ট্রেন্ডি, আমি একটা স্ক্রিপ্ট লিখলাম, ওই ফিল্মটা বের হতে হতে কিন্তু 1-2 বছর চলে যাবে। It's not going to be trendy anymore. So that's what I believe as an artist is, if I follow my heart, and আমি যদি এমন কিছু বানাই যেটা not what's trending, but what's trending in my heart, right? What I want to make, what is not trending, what's not out there that I can fill, a gap that I can fill, that comes from maybe my past, my childhood, my trauma, my life. If I can tap into that, তাহলে হয়তোবা জিনিসটা universal হবে। হয়তোবা এটা 1 মাস পরে হোক বা 1 বছর পরে হোক, it's not going to be content, it's going to be historic, it's going to be part of like a bigger, hopefully a bigger legacy. You know, that's just kind of what I've been trying to do lately, and hearing those wonderful words from you makes me feel like maybe ekটু হলেও জিনিসটা কাজ করছে. So thank you so much for saying that.
Thank you so much, Nuhash, for gracing us with your presence today. And thank you to all of you for being such a wonderful audience. I know a lot more of you had questions, but we're so sorry we're out of time. Hope you all enjoyed the rest of the festival, and I'm sure you can catch Nuhash outside for some more Q&A if you would like to.
Thank you so much, everyone.